Chapter 5. Do you know what I think you're doing? Asked Gwen. We were having a cup of tea together in the kitchen before I set out for my grandfather's farm. I think you need to feel you're a part of some great tradition and not out on a limb all by yourself. I think you want to get in touch with the past again. And furthermore, I think you're right. Reach back as far as you can, David. That's what you need just now. I'd phoned Grandpa to say I wanted to see him. You come right on, son, he said. We'll have us a talk. My grandfather was 79 years old and as full of vinegar as ever. Grandfather was known all over the country in the early days. He was of English, Welsh, Dutch descent, and he himself was the son and the grandson, and perhaps the great-grandson, of a preacher. The tradition is lost in the early history of the Protestant Reformation in Western Europe and the British Isles. As far as I know, since the days when clergymen first started to marry in the Christian church, there has been a Wilkerson in the ministry, and usually in a fire ministry too. It was a long drive from Phillipsburg to the farm outside Toledo, Ohio, where Grandpa was resting in his retirement. I spent most of the drive getting back in touch with my past, as Gwen said. It was a lively set of memories, especially when Grandfather came into view. Grandpa was born in Cleveland, Tennessee. By the time he reached his 20s, he was already a preacher. It's a good thing that he was young, because his life was rigorous. Grandfather was a circuit rider, which meant he had to spend a good part of his ministry in the saddle. He'd ride Nellie from one frame church building to another, and usually he was preacher, choir director, and sexton all in one. He'd be the first one at the church. He'd light up the fire and sweep out of the moss mats and air the place. Then the congregation would arrive, and he'd lead them in some old-time singing like Amazing Grace and What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And then he'd preach. Grandpa's preaching was very unorthodox, and some of his convictions shocked his contemporaries. For instance, when my grandfather was a young preacher, it was considered sinful to wear ribbons and feathers. The elders in some churches carried scissors on cords at their side. If a penitent lady came forward to the altar wearing a ribbon in her head, the scissors went to work, along with a lecture titled, How Will You Get to Heaven with All the Ribbons on Your Clothes? Grandpa changed his mind about this kind of thing. As he grew older, he developed what he called the lamb chop school of evangelizing. You win over people just like you win over a dog, he used to say. You see a dog passing down the street with an old bone in his mouth. You don't grab the bone from him and tell him it's not good for him. He'll growl at you. It's the only thing he has. You throw a big fat lamb chop down in front of him, and he's going to drop the bone and pick up the lamb chop, his tail wagging to beat the band. And you've got a friend. Instead of going around grabbing bones from people or cutting feathers off them, I'm going to throw them some lamb chops, something with real meat and life in it. I'm going to tell them about new beginnings. Grandpa preached at tent meetings as well as churches, and to this day, when I go around the country, I hear tales of the way old J. Wilkerson used to keep those meetings hopping. One time, for instance, he was preaching in a tent in Jamaica, Long Island. He had a good crowd because it was the 4th of July weekend and a lot of people were on holiday. That afternoon, my grandfather had been visiting a friend in the hardware business. Grandpa's friend showed him some new sparkler material that snapped and sparkled and smoked when you stepped on it. He hoped that this would be a big item for the forest. Grandpa was intrigued and bought some. He put it in a paper bag, then stuck in it his pocket and forgot all about it. My grandfather talked about the new life in Christ. We also talked about hell, and he was sometimes pretty vivid in his descriptions of what this place was going to be like. Grandpa was talking along these lines that July night when his hand happened to wander to his coat pocket and felt the sparkler stuff. Very quietly he picked up a handful of the powder and let it drop behind him on the platform. Then with perfect deadpan expression, pretending he never noticed a thing, he continued to talk about hell, while the smoke billowed up behind him and the platform crackled. Word got around that when Wilkerson spoke about hell, you could almost smell the smoke and see the sparks.